Thanks again for joining us today to talk about event planning. So we're going to focus a bit on donor events in today's meeting and hopefully have some group discussion. But I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today could really apply to any event that you might be holding. I think some of the stuff we talk about is probably thinking a bit more about larger events, but I think you can scale down to smaller events as well. But kind of would love to hear from folks about kind of events you all have had in the past as we get into the presentation, what has worked for you, what hasn't, and that sort of thing. So today, as you probably know, is being recorded. And Jess, would you be able to turn on the captions? Oh, I think I got it actually. Yeah, I'm just gonna run automated captions. You can always turn those off at the bottom, but those can help folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, or if you're in a loud space, they can help as well. So I like to add those. Feel free, since we're a small group, if you want to unmute and ask a question or add a comment to the chat, please feel welcome to do that. But just mute if you aren't speaking. And next meeting will be so folks probably know this, but in case you don't, every third Thursday of the month, we have a workshop or a presentation, a panel. Usually it's from 9 to 10, but next month it will be 9:30 to 10:30. And we will be in person at the Radford Public Library. They open at 9, so we're just pushing our meeting a little bit. We'll have coffee and donuts and fruit, and we'd love to have you all there. And we're going to be talking about how we can network better as nonprofits in the New River Valley. So we would love to have you all there. And it's going to be co-led by Laura Beth Weaver from Women's Resource Center and Andy Gillespie from New NRV Care. So looking forward to that. All right. So I'll just jump right in. So when you think about holding an event that's specific for donors, why might you do that? Events in general can be time consuming and costly. Anyone who's ever worked on one knows how many details there can be and how much it can be. So with our kind of precious time and resources, how do we make sure that they're worthwhile and why do them in the first place? So events are really an opportunity to share about your work with a captive audience. The people who are there have opted in to be there, right? And that means that they have some kind of interest in your work. Maybe there's someone new to your organization. Maybe there's someone who's been involved with you for a while, but it's an opportunity to deepen those relationships and have that shared experience together. And so you can share your work with those new folks or the folks who've been there for a while, get updates. You get to network with potentially new donors or volunteers. You get to thank your existing supporters. And you might be in it to raise money for a specific project or a mission. Your mission. So donor events don't necessarily have to be a fundraising event. They could be something that's a stewardship event, which is when you're thanking donors, or it could be cultivation, where you're looking at new donors or working with a longtime donor to potentially ask for something new. So there's a lot of different things you can do in an event in terms of your purpose. And it's good to sit down and think about that before you decide to hold an event. So that's where I would start when you're thinking about an event. What are your goals? What's your purpose? The things I just talked about, that could be a lot to fit into one meeting, right? So maybe it's just a couple things. Maybe you want to introduce new people to your mission and then mingle and network with your existing donors, right? And I think that's a great purpose and for the meeting. And then maybe some goals could come out of that. It could be that it is a fundraising event and you're raising money for a specific goal. And again, it could be that you're thanking and stewarding those existing donors. And something about thanking and stewarding your existing donors is that's something that I think, it depends on the donor and what their communication preferences and if they like to be spotlighted, if they don't, if they kind of like to give behind the scenes. But we have so many small opportunities and events like this to thank donors, and even if it's just with a conversation, and knowing that they just gave a gift last month to say thank you. So there's a lot of opportunity with everyone in the room to make an impact. So what might success look like if you're thinking about some of the one of these purposes? So if it's new people involved in your mission, and that's the goal of this event, maybe it's you're low on volunteers. I know that's the case with many of us across the board. Is it potentially and that's helping specifically with your programs? For us at the Community Foundation, we have several committees that folks can serve on, like our scholarship committee, where they help us read through 150 scholarship applications, which makes you want to give money to every student. They're incredible. Or on our grants committee to read grant applications, and it's very similar, and you can get people involved in learning about your work, right? So success in an event like that, if you're focused on new people, could be conversations with key people at the event. Maybe your board member brought a couple friends and said, you should really talk to this person. They are really passionate about your work and want to do X potentially. And make sure that you're following up with them after the event, exchange contact information, maybe meet with them for coffee or lunch, that sort of thing. Or maybe it's just they could come by and kind of tour your space if there's things to see that where your clients are, or if you have a food pantry, that sort of thing. What can you show the donor to get them further engaged? So with raising money, probably these are probably obvious, but I think both either the number of donors could be something that you look at as a goal for success, or money raised. I think both are great, and that's something that we look at with our Give Local NRV Giving Day. The money raised certainly is very important, but when you look at the number of donors who are contributing to that effort, it's also quite astounding. In that case, it's literally thousands of people. And then if your goal for this event is thanking donors, it could maybe the success is simply getting all those folks in one room and telling them, hey, this is what we've done in the past year, and we did that because of you. You made it possible. And things like that. I think that the simple making sure that you're thanking donors in different ways and regularly throughout the year, this is one opportunity to do that in person that can make a big difference. And I can pause there and just ask if Laura and Jess might want to add anything here about what might success look like for some of these events.
I guess the only other thing I would add in for these types of events is, one thing that we hear a lot from nonprofits is the best way to engage board members in fundraising, and events are a really good way to do that, and can often be kind of a low intensity way, I guess I would say. So it could be another goal or way of measuring success to get a sense of how many board members are engaged in the event, and particularly if they're bringing other people with them. That's something that you can ask a board member to do at an event. So it's, they're not asking their neighbor for $10,000. They're just bringing somebody to an event to introduce the organization. And that can be a nice way to engage them. And then the other opportunity when we think about thanking donors, or really any event that you have, is thinking about, recognition. Are there particular folks that you want to recognize? We have an event coming up where we recognize a donor every year. And so they can create opportunities to thank your donors as a whole, but maybe you want to lift up certain individuals, volunteers, donors, other organizations that are partners that you work with as examples of what you want other people to do. And events like this can be a great way to have that kind of recognition and sort of set that model for others who might attend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jess. And I've two examples come to mind of events that I've attended that one was a bit more low key. It was in Bissett Park with Bradford Fairlawn and Daily Bread, and they did a volunteer recognition lunch, and their board was out, and They have a couple staff people, but a ton of volunteers, and everyone's together. And that's one organization where the volunteers might not see each other a lot because you're all doing different routes. So it was nice for everyone to come together, and it was a really nice lunch. But it was a bit more low key because it was outside, and we had a great day, which, you never know in the New River Valley, but it was really great for everyone to be together and chat. And then another example, this was pre-pandemic, was actually Women's Resource Center. One of their luncheons where it was essentially, there was, my recollection, and Laura Beth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're sort of like table captains, and that captain would invite people to the table. And I knew about the Women's Resource Center, but I don't know if I donated before, but I know I took out my checkbook in that meeting because it was so inspiring, and I wanted to give right there. So and that was a pretty, it felt fancy because we were at the inn. It was really nice event. And it was quite much a larger crowd, but both events, one was a fundraiser and one was more stewardship. Both formats were really great and felt really personal, even though they were different sizes, but they both were just, those come to mind as great examples of events I've been to. When I think about events, sometimes when I think about them, they might, something larger comes to mind. We have a couple larger events. Probably our largest is our scholarship luncheon that we have at the Community Foundation. We had about 200 people here at a lunch in the spring, and this is an event that Laura puts on, does an amazing job. But what about when your budget is small? Maybe you don't have the budget to rent out a banquet hall and host a meal for 200 people. A successful event like that example of Radford Fairlawn Daily Bread in the park, it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars spent or hundreds of people invited. So when I think about different lower budget events, that picnic comes to mind. Although this one was catered, but a potluck picnic is an option. A pint night or a percentage night at a restaurant or a brewery, or an open house in your space, and showing people this is the work here that you can see, and we can look at the space together. So those are some of the kind of lower budget events that came into mind for me. Has anyone held an event like this? And how did it go for you? I think we have some of them in the chat too. Oh, Laura Beth will be right back.
So speaking not from my nonprofit hat, because I'm actually a little bit new to that field, but I worked in childcare before this, which it's not called nonprofit, but let's all be honest, we're working for sure on a nonprofit budget. So we did open houses each year with dual purpose. So we typically did an open house for families coming back in the fall, similar to the school system, but we would typically also invite our wait list families. And so that goal was again, within that budget constraint, we wanted to have people come in and see the center and see what we offered, but in a way that didn't require overtime of our staff members, additional supplies and materials, because we could use those supplies and materials that we used for our open house. So we kind of coupled that growth opportunity, so kind of mirroring that donor opportunity with our current clients. So I think it looks very similar to what we've been talking about in that nonprofit realm, that just utilizing an event we already had established to then bring in those new families to see what we have to offer. And the same thing for here at the Youth Center. I'm working on kind of an open house / donor thank you event in January where I want to show off, I think one of the things that we're struggling with the Youth Center is there hasn't been a lot of marketing around what's happening here. And so there's been a lot of great things, but not a lot of people know about them, because if you aren't a client of the services that are being provided, it hasn't really been advertised. But quite frankly, you need to see it, and you need to be in the building and feel it. So that's something that that open house idea is exactly what I'd already been kind of working through in my brain, is how do we get community members in to see what's happening and thank our donors that made it happen. So I like that idea of an open house to let them see it, while we also say thank you for those that have contributed to the progress that's been made at this point. And that can all be done pretty inexpensively. Add some snacks and there's some nice displays that we can mostly print out here. And I feel like we can do that definitely on a small budget just to get that thank you and that look what we're doing out there.
I love that.
We do something similar. We just started, we're trying to do it quarterly at the Ron McDonald House, and it's actually board driven. We have our board members sort of speak at it, and we ask them to invite 2 to 3 people, use our development committee that have never done anything with the Ron McDonald House, but we actually call it a hug and a mug coffee hour. So we promote it as a networking event for an hour or 30 minutes, but we only talk for about 10 or 15 minutes of it. And so it allows people to come network with each other. We've gotten lucky, like we have one coming up in, I think, 2 weeks, and Starbucks is donating the coffee for us. And then we just go out and get some pastries, but it's a non-ask event, but it's helping us and our board members have a bigger involvement in our house and just inviting those people we don't know yet. And like I said, it's not asked, but it gets them into our facility. And like I said, the board speaks during it. We do not, as the staff. The board does all the speaking and talking about who we are and why they're involved with the organization. So the other one theme that we have is, and I can't remember it. It's something with desserts, but it's home sweet home dessert hour, I believe. So that would be more in the afternoon for those that can't do coffee hours. But when they come for the coffee hour, they do get a mug. We did get sponsors to cover a mug with our logo on it. So they all walk away with one little thing with them. And we have, of course, all of our literature stuffed in the coffee mug. So that's one of the things we do to just get people into our facility.
I love that. And I actually got to go to your facility when I was dropping off Give Local shirts in June, and just being in that space, it makes such a difference. Like knowing what that space does and how many family it helps. It helps. I think those events sound like great ideas.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
There
no,
was one.
Go ahead.
Okay, Friends of Peak Creek, we have a volunteer appreciation picnic every year. We stick it in the budget right at the beginning, and we're actually planning for it right now. It's next week. We just invite all of our volunteers and all of our members and have a small catered picnic, and we give out awards and recognitions. We'll have a speaker. It'll be a short speaker, but it's just a give back and a thank you. It's not really an ask either, although we do have a strategically placed merch table and membership applications. But it's basically just to give back to people and to say thank you. And they seem to appreciate it. We also just happen to invite all the local dignitaries and that kind of stuff to kind of show what we've done for the year. So it's just a really brief thank you, and we kind of promote ourselves, and it's a very casual atmosphere.
That sounds great, Kathy.
Hey, Lindsay, we with at Beans and Rice, the first one we really did this time was kind of get the information out, because we started changing some things in the building, and we tapped into the Chamber Business After Hours, so they help advertise it and get it, and it was really fun. So we're already signed up to do another one next year. So I think sometimes we can kind of combine energies, and you can reach more people, and maybe the ones you wouldn't reach personally on your own, just putting it out from your list or email and who you know. So
Absolutely. Combining forces, it makes such a difference. I love those. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. All right. So when you're planning a larger event, in the next couple of slides, I'll kind of talk about this, but I think you'll see from the slides that these certainly can be changed too if you're planning a smaller, less complex event. So hopefully it all feels applicable. But when I think about a larger event or one that takes a lot of complex planning, I'm thinking of something maybe 100 people plus, and types of events that come to mind for this are auctions or banquets, galas, runs, tournaments, like a golf tournament. And all of these can be a ton of details to organize in addition to what an event usually entails. And so I know in the past, the Community Foundation had an auction for a long time, and we pivoted to something that was a bit more simple to organize. But I know organizations like NRV Cares have a successful auction each year. And I believe that CalFE did one that was kind of an auction and a gala earlier this year that had a lot of success. Something that Springhouse out in Floyd started this year for Give Local was a 5K that they're going to do in the month of June. And they started this year and learned all about all the fun permitting processes you go through to get roads closed and all that fun stuff. But that's something that they're hoping to offer each year as a way for their students and their families to gather, and hopefully other folks to gather. Any other events like this that come to mind for folks that I'm leaving off the list, or one that you really enjoyed?
Something that's a little different. This is Ginny at Literacy Volunteers. This is not our event, but I've attended that Cheeseburger in Paradise event at Warm Hearth Village for their foundation. And that is a little bit of a different format than other things that I've been to, where they have the different chefs there and they make a different cheeseburger and you kind of vote, and they have a small auction there. But it's a nice, different kind of format than some of the other events that we do and that I've been to.
That sounds like a lot of fun. The biggest gala I've ever been to, I worked for an organization in Boston for 4 years after college called Axion, and they had their 50th anniversary celebration. And Axion does microfinance work all over the world and other financial literacy stuff. And we had it in New York City at Cipriani, which for someone from rural Vermont, it was just a little different, very exciting to be a part of. And just had probably 200 people in the room, and there's so much energy. And this is not meant to be critical of anybody, but our CEO was pretty new and he didn't want to ask for people to like take out their checkbooks. And so we kind of skipped that moment of the gala, but I think that could have maybe generated a lot of gifts in that moment because there was so much momentum. And so I always look back and wonder, like, if we had done that slightly differently, but it was still a super successful event. No one in the room knew we were kind of going back and forth on that. But sometimes that momentum can really inspire people to give right in the moment. But that was a super fun event.
Lindsay, can I just share
course.
something I've learned sort of in that moment? We were talking a little bit earlier, somebody mentioned, board involvement and how the board can help get people here. One of the things that we found to be really helpful is that, we all have board members who are super committed to the mission, but are not interested in asking people for money. And so I'm always really clear with our board, you get the people to the event and I will ask them for money. Like, you don't have to ask them for money. I will shamelessly do that. And for like the luncheons that you were talking about, it really helped people get involved and invite folks where they maybe normally wouldn't if they thought they were going to be the ones asking for money. And so being really clear about that has been helpful.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Laura Beth, because even, there's so many people out there who love to give themselves, but they're like, I just don't want to ask other people for money. And I think what you said and what Jess said of just make that ask of getting them in the room. And as fundraisers, we will shamelessly ask anyone for money. So we'll absolutely take care of that piece of it. So I love that, of making that expectation super clear to your board members ahead of time. Makes a lot of sense.
Lindsay, we had a fun way of an ask. We had a huge banquet. I think it was our 20th anniversary. I can't remember. But anyway, we had a big giant tree. And we had apples, and people could write their pledges on the apples and pin it on the tree.
Love that.
We had a full tree by the end of the night.
I think I would imagine it's inspiring to see other people doing that in the moment and saying, oh, that person gave that, I'll give that, or I'll give more than that. Yeah,
Well, it was anonymous, so you just wrote it on the back of the apple. And so, yeah, it was just a fun way, but yeah, it was just fun to watch everybody mosey on up to the tree as the program progressed.
I love that. What a great idea. Oh. All right. Can head on to my next slide. So when you think about when to hold your event, we all are, have full calendars, often very small shops that are nonprofits. So what I would suggest there is if you're new to event planning or you're thinking about like, maybe we want to move this event, look at your full calendar year and think about the times of year when potentially you're a little bit less busy, it's a little bit less hectic. And maybe that's the time of the year when you're not reaching out to your supporters as much. And that might be a time when you have both the bandwidth and a time when it would be good to touch base with your supporters. And maybe that's when you choose. And think about with that, how often are your supporters hearing from you? Are they just hearing from you? And when I say supporters in this particular case, I'm thinking of donors. Are they hearing from you for end of year appeal or Giving Tuesday appeal? Are you involved with Give Local and maybe you do an appeal then, but you're not hearing about them a lot? So maybe with the cadence of the year, you want to add an event, and so they are engaged with you again. And it wouldn't be an event without me mentioning Give Local Giving Day, which I think most of the folks on the call are involved in. But that could be a natural fit to hold an event. We have organizations who hold events throughout that month and on the Giving Day itself. And it can be a great excuse of, it's June. We're raising money for Give Local. Let's get together, have an open house, do that 5K run like Springhouse is doing. Performances or classes. I know that the Junebug Center had a full day of things this past year, but it could be a good excuse of, you're already doing this one thing, maybe have people join you in person as well. Another thing I think about with event planning is what's going on regionally that could potentially interfere with your attendance. And it could be that a Virginia Tech football game won't pull people from your event. But it could be that parking downtown is going to be a nightmare. So you're not going to do it in Blacksburg that day. So just thinking about kind of the full scope of what's going on in your area can help you when you're thinking about event timing. And then I'll also add, there can always be a good excuse to get together, right? There doesn't need to be something new going on, but if you have something exciting coming up, say a milestone anniversary, something that comes to mind for the Community Foundation is we have our 30th anniversary coming up next year. So we're putting our brains to work at an upcoming board retreat to talk about how do we want to celebrate all year round, not just at one potential big event, but what are we going to do to highlight that we've been around for 30 years? Or do you have a new project or branch of your work? Last year for Give Local, right around that time, the YMCA at Virginia Tech had just gotten their new food truck and everyone had voted on the design and they revealed the design of the truck. So they had the truck there and then we saw a mock-up of what it would look like. And it was just cool to see that part of their work in person because they've been talking about it a lot. But like I said, there doesn't necessarily have to be something new going on. Maybe it's just an opportunity to keep your supporters updated on your work and re-engage them in your work. So an event that Jess mentioned that we hold is our Celebration of Giving, and that we hold that in September, and it's a donor event and a stewardship event where we honor a specific donor or group of donors. But it's, I think holding it in September is a lesser busy time for us, but it's nothing new necessarily going on, but saying, here's what we did for this past year and how you all helped us get there. It's a great event. So things to keep in mind with details. So after you determine your event purpose and your goals, then I think you can figure out what your date is and if you're going to have some kind of venue, if it's outside of your organization. And then putting together your event timeline. When thinking about sending out invitations, trying to do that at least 6 weeks out. Or if it's before that, doing maybe some kind of save the date to folks, depending on the size of the event or how many people you want to invite. And thinking, are we going to mail these? Are we going to do them in electronic? And then follow up after invites are sent out. And that follow up can look a lot of different ways. Maybe you're inviting donors and volunteers to an event. And when you see your volunteers, when they come in for whatever shift, say, hey, did you know about this event? Do you want to come? Send emails and make phone calls, and making sure that you're getting the people who you want in the room. If you have a specific plan of folks in particular that you want to, and then doing that, harnessing your ambassadors, right? Your board members and your best supporters, and saying, hey, could you bring a friend? If it's an event that's more open to the public and it's less focused, what's your publicity plan? How are you going to get the word out to potentially new folks? And I think, again, maybe in that case, asking your best supporters to invite 5 people instead of 2, or whatever the size of your event, and but just getting that momentum is really can help you get folks there. And then there's probably a million other details to arrange. A couple that came to mind for me are thinking about food, or if you're going to have alcohol, that could be a whole separate thing. Having different speakers, if you're going to have music. So the details can certainly go on and on with a large event, but those are some of the things that come to mind. Any other big details I'm leaving out? Laura, you're our events guru, so I mean.
Well, as you mentioned, alcohol, you have to get an ABC license, and that can be kind of tricky. Venues can be tricky. You kind of have to book a venue in advance. That you can't just book a venue a couple weeks before your event. So that's really tricky right there.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, so here's a few of the venues that came to mind for us. This was more thinking about larger venues. So certainly it's not comprehensive of all the meeting spaces. But I think anyone who's planned a large event in our region knows it can be tricky to find a space that can hold a couple hundred people or even 100 people. But and when we think about where we hold our events at the Community Foundation, we do try to move them around to different regions because we do cover, and I didn't include width here, but width is part of an area that we give at the Community Foundation. So we don't want to always have it in Blacksburg, right? But Blacksburg does have several good venues, so it's challenging. When folks look at this list, what venues might you add to this list? I had just the one for Giles, and I know that there's more, but couldn't come up with any. This was kind of my first brainstorm on my list.
Mountain Lake Lodge up in Giles does some events. It's just making sure folks feel comfortable driving up there, particularly on time of year.
Yeah.
Folks might be able to tell me. I don't know whether Doe Creek Farm is still hosting events or not in Giles. Yeah, and then Ginny added Sinkland.
Sinkland is great.
Minor.
Yeah. I know that Laura Beth, you all had that event at the Han Garden Pavilion earlier this year. I've done donor events there when I was with Tech, and I really enjoyed that space.
They were wonderful to work with. Parking was difficult, but I think people expect that when they come on campus.
Sure.
The other place we had a really nice event was the like the conference room sort of in Kyle Hall at the business school at Radford. And they were wonderful to work with, and it was really nice.
Nice. Yeah, Kyle Hall is a great space. So the last piece that I'll add before I'm going to turn it over to our special guest, who is Ginny from Literacy Volunteers, soon to be Literacy NRV. I'll incorporate that into my vocabulary. So the last piece I'll share before I turn it over to Ginny is thinking about the event follow-up. I don't know about all of you, but once I've finished up with an event, often I'm exhausted. And so it can be hard to think about those follow-up steps. So it might be good in your planning just to have that follow-up step already set. Like, we know this is what we're going to do. So you can keep that momentum going. But for example, if it's part of your purpose was new people involved in your mission, following up on any leads generated during the event. Who did you talk to who seemed really interested or said, I want to talk further, or come visit your facility, and brainstorm that with your team. Did they and your board members, did they have good conversations, and kind of do that debrief and ask folks who wants to follow up with whom, and maybe you get a group together and they all come together, or maybe it's one-on-one coffees, that sort of thing. If your goal was raising money, share your success with those who attended and those who didn't. So if you have that RSVP list that you're emailing out, some people said they weren't able to go, or they RSVP'd yes, but something came up, let them know how you did. Don't assume that they'll just hear about it. Send that email and say, hey, here's a link to photos that we took at the event. And by the way, did you know we raised $20,000 thanks to you all? And think about taking some time to send personalized emails to large donors or sponsors of the event, and make sure that they know what kind of impact they had. And then if your event is about thanking donors, that's another one where if you had those who couldn't attend, send an electronic update. So say you shared, this is what we did this past year. Send something similar in an email and saying, hey, we know you weren't able to make it, but we just wanted to know that you were part of this success of these things that we accomplished this year. And that's another opportunity, if you took photos at an event, to send a link to those photos so people could see what it was like and be a part of it. And I like to do that when we have an album up on Facebook, and we're now back on Instagram, but sending those links out to folks, and maybe they'll engage with our social media page a little bit and stop to look at other things that we have going on. So there's probably a ton more event follow-up steps that you could do, but I think if you incorporate that into part of your planning and say, these are likely the things we're going to do after the event. And it doesn't necessarily mean if you have 100 people there, you have to follow up with all 100, right? That's a lot. Maybe your goal is following up with 5 people after their event. So thinking about what's realistic for you and the time that you have is what I would advise there. So I'm going to pause and ask if folks have any questions before I pass the mic over to Ginny.
I just wanted to add one thing. When we were talking about details, we didn't talk specifically about a photographer, but I would say if your budget allows, that for us is really key. When we have a professional photographer, several years ago, we kind of started just building that into our budget. We're happy to recommend folks that we've worked with. It is super helpful when we go to do any kind of publication or annual report, and are just great ways to kind of capture all the different people involved. And even, at least I found, even if you think you're okay with a camera, you are likely not as good as the professional photographer. So just hire the professional photographer to do it. Because I think that's really money well spent, particularly for larger scale events that you might have, or if you want to do a lot of marketing as follow-up, those photos are really, really useful. So just to plug in for that expense as part of your budget.
Yeah, agreed. And if your event doesn't allow or your budget doesn't allow for a professional photographer, there are so many students at Virginia Tech who are really talented, who are building their portfolios and aren't charging the same rates. And also, if you're not even at that point, maybe it's designated one particular volunteer who has a good eye and asking them to be your photographer, as opposed to, you know, you're trying to meet with people, you're trying to make sure that the caterer, coordinate with the caterer, all those things. Splitting up those duties is always helpful, so you're not the one who has to do that. But yeah, absolutely. If you have the money, the photographers that we work with are incredible. So with that, I can stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Jenny, and who's going to talk about two of the events that Literacy NRV holds.
Yeah, thank you. And I've gotten so many ideas written down just from this meeting. So thank you for everybody for sharing. And we spend a lot of time just following what all the other organizations are doing and attending those events as we can and participating. And that's a great way to learn too, not to mention networking. So we do several events throughout the year, and we do kind of try to space them out kind of quarterly. And the few of these events we've been doing for a long time. So I'll also share that with the caveat that I kind of inherited these events. I also liked, Lindsay, what you talked about with thinking through why you're doing it and what your goals are. And so we're really we started taking this calendar year to go through our events and take a really hard look at what's happening at them. Are they really achieving the goals that we want them to? And so we have our annual Scrabble tournament in the spring. That's usually in the April timeframe. And then at Give Local in June, we do an open house for that. So that was one of the options that we talked about. That's a lot of fun for us. It traditionally is not hugely attended during the day, but I think part of that exercise for me is inviting people and just giving them a reason to come by and see us, and we're open and we want you to come and have a good time and celebrate this day with us. Give Local is by far our biggest fundraiser, but it's not the in-person part, of course, that's the fundraising. So, and then we do our Tri-Wizard, Tri-Mile Potter in the Park race, which is next Saturday, if anybody's interested in joining us for that. And then we have a recognition celebration in the fall. And we're shifting this year. That is going to be more of a picnic format in early October, like you were describing that Daily Bread does. We did it in the past. We've used a church fellowship hall for that, and it was great to have that space. It was free, but we had to really limit the number of people that we can invite, and we want to be able to invite all of our students. It's a potluck. We have a lot of international students. They love sharing food in particular and talking about it, and so we're excited to see how that happens. That is not specifically a fundraising event, although we tend to get a few donors get excited at that event, and we get a few gifts each year following that. So I was just going to share today quickly about our Scrabble tournament and Potter in the Park. So compared to a lot of the other things, those are more activity kind of entertainment based, I guess. There's something for people to do as part of it. It's not just fundraising in and of itself. And so from a logistics planning perspective, the Scrabble tournament has a lot less moving parts. It is a Scrabble tournament. It's a pretty specific audience that wants to come to that. And we just have this same format that we follow year after year. We just kind of get more feedback about more Scrabble, less talking. You know, we get concerned about adding all this frou-frou stuff and raffles and trying to have somebody, you know, special be a speaker there. And they're just like, they just want to play Scrabble and win the prizes. So that one is a fairly easy lift for us. I think we've reached our capacity on it, which is about 80 to 100 people each year. And so we've kind of decided it's easy to plan. It just kind of rolls along. We have the same sponsors every year that are interested. And so we're less concerned now with growing that impact and freaking out about publicity and just kind of going with it how it is. I'm interested in the possibility of doing it more quarterly. So kind of like a pint night, but combining it with playing Scrabble and making it a little more casual and fun. And so that is something like that is fairly easy to carry off. Again, it's not a lot of volunteer time required. We don't have to really think about what we're going to do and reinvent the wheel every year. Now, Potter in the Park, on the other hand, is very volunteer intensive for the run. We have to have, you know, there's setup and all the preparation for it. And then the setup that morning, which is really early. We have to have race marshals all along the course. We're very fortunate to do it at Bissett Park. So we don't have to worry about the shutting down the road, permits and things like that. The city of Bradford is wonderful to work with. And so we have about 180 to 200 people attend that. And so that one's very family focused. It's fun. People get kind of excited about it. There's awesome pictures. A lot of people are in costume coming to do the run. And so that's a really good time. And of course we give away the t-shirts with it. And it's fun to see those around town. We've been at other events, other big fundraising events for other organizations, and somebody will have their Potter shirt on. And so it's fun to see that and to kind of get our name out for that. And so they're a little bit different too. Scrabble is inside, easy to not really worry about the weather. Potter, on the other hand, is outside, is rain or shine. We won't shut it down unless there's like a lightning situation for that. So the venues are very different. And then Scrabble, there's of course the cost of the venue. We have to make sure it fits a certain number of people, whereas with Potter, it doesn't really matter. I think if we went above 300 people, it might be too much, but we're outside at Bissett and it can just kind of flex in that space. And I mentioned Potter's mostly for families. It's in the morning. We just have a little bit of food, so that's easy. Whereas Scrabble, we've got the ABC license for the bar, and we have to have dinner there and our heavy hors d'oeuvres and that kind of thing. So just a couple of successes and challenges with those. Each one of those events is different, and there are people who are very passionate about both. There's a lot of people who love to play Scrabble, and there's a lot of people who might come to a fundraiser of ours because they want to support us, but they really don't. I mean, some of my friends are like, yeah, but I don't want to play Scrabble. So I think it's limiting in a way, and that's why we've just kind of decided we're okay with it being this sort of package. It raises this much money each year, and we'll continue to do it. And then similar with Potter, there's a certain group of people that are more interested in Harry Potter related things. So I think that's a plus, but also a minus, because I think if people are thinking, I don't really care about that, they may not want to be involved. There's also been some, J.K. Rowling's been in the news the last year or two with some controversial comments. And so we've tried to address that with some of our participants too. Let's see, I was checking out my notes here. That's a lot. So they're both very staff intensive. I know I attended the NRV Cares auction this year, which is a wonderful event. Very well organized. The auction is great. I know it's a big fundraiser for them, but also they have a couple of key volunteers that really lead that for them, that kind of can go around and get those auction items. So I think that that's really important too, to have somebody passionate about it. So yeah, we raise our most money we think about this a lot. We raise our most money with Give Local, and then also Giving Tuesday and our year end just sort of letter campaign. And so it's a lot to think about in balancing how much time do you devote to hosting an event, but that also allows you, Scrabble, we're usually on one or two of the news channels, and it lets us be out there and talking. And so I think there's a lot of value outside of just the amount that you're raising and just getting your name in the paper. There's something fun they can talk about, that kind of thing. Let's see, I think what we are missing is a true donor stewardship event, in the same way that like the Women's Resource Center event that you all were talking about, where the board is involved and brings people with the goal of, I'm going to get my checkbook out and write a check. So I think sometimes we get concerned about entertaining people or having some kind of activity when a lot of people are just like, hey, you know what? I love you. I want to give, just like ask me to do it. So I think that we are missing that piece. But there is freedom in having something fun and sort of getting that kind of repeatable process that you can do, and also allowing yourself to be okay with, this is what we're going to make at this event. So we want to make sure we've got, 150 people, and we'll just go with it how it is. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. There's so many bigger and fun events, and I think we all do a great job throughout the NRV of not necessarily stepping on toes. We all do something a little bit different, and it's fun to go and support each other. We're challenged here in our area with having most of us serve people all across the New River Valley. And so as far as open houses are concerned, we've talked about taking ours on the road, and especially to Floyd and Giles. And so we're all constantly recruiting volunteers because that's where the bulk of our work is done through with literacy tutoring and things like that. And so just having open houses for potential students and volunteers to come learn about us and learn about the mission and what we do. It's hard for people to just get to one place sometimes.
Absolutely. That was great, Jenny. And I appreciate how it seems clear that you all have looked at, like, are these events working for us and meeting our goal? And that can be challenging when it's been kind of a tradition in an organization to sunset a program potentially. But I appreciate that the calculus you did on the Scrabble tournament of, you know, we know it's going to raise X amount of money each year. It's maybe not going to be our $1 million event, but it's like, you know, to expect that money, and it's part of your budget, which is great. We had a question in the chat from Vicky, and then we can wrap up. So it says, Ginny, do you set an expected ROI for your events?
Ooh, that's a great question. Not a specific number. We try to keep our expenses as low as possible. Our goal is to have all registrations go 100% of those proceeds go to the program. So if we can have sponsors, our goal is to have sponsors at least cover the expenses for us. The Scrabble expenses are very low other than the venue costs. And so we try to keep that low. We have board members and volunteers that donate food for things like that. Also true for Potter. Potter expenses are very low, other than the t-shirts are the big expense for those. But yeah, that's a great question. And I'd love to hear if other people kind of set out with that goal. It's a great way to decide and have some proof for your board about whether we want to do this or not, continue doing it or not.
Absolutely. And Ginny, you mentioned folks paying for certain things, board members bringing things, sponsors. I know that I believe it was Jean who mentioned Starbucks donated coffee. Whenever you can get someone to pay for something and have it be an in-kind contribution, or it's an outright gift to help offset costs to those events, because balancing that message of, we blew a bunch of money on this event and now help us raise money for our programs, can be challenging. So if you know that you can share that sponsors helped you, and we work really hard to keep our costs down, and use the New River Valley as a beautiful setting. If the weather's cooperating, you can have a really great event it's not a huge expense to you all and more money to your programs.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to be honest, catering is one of the big ones that is just a big barrier for us. Yeah. So we've talked about having a literacy luncheon with a speaker and some students talking is kind of, you know, one of my dreams, or a breakfast, but that's not going to be really appropriate for people to just be donating, you know, granola bars and stuff like that. It needs to be nicer than that. So that's been something we've struggled with.
For sure. Well, I know we're at 10, so I just really appreciate you all joining today. Jenny, thank you so much for sharing. And I reached out to you last minute, and I appreciate you being up for sharing with us. But thank you all for joining and sharing your ideas. I know we could probably keep talking, but if you ever want to brainstorm with us about this or any other topic, we're always happy to chat.